cold, infinite black between the stars, the Zorthaxian Dominion stretched its merciless claws across 1,000 conquered worlds. Their armadas were the stuff of nightmares, vast black hulls the size of cities, bristling with plasma lances capable of glassing entire continents in minutes, and shields that laughed in the face of dying suns. Supreme Overlord Crixer ruled from a throne carved from the fossilized bones of 100 fallen kings, his multifaceted compound eyes glittering with the endless hunger of an empire that had never tasted defeat. High Admiral Thalvor stood motionless on the bridge of the flagship Void Reaver, his 6-clawed hands clasped tightly behind his armored back. The holographic star map pulsed with blood-red icons marking their latest victories. Another sector swallowed whole. Another civilization crushed before it could even draw breath. The Dominion's march across the galaxy had been unstoppable for centuries. Until the scout drone returned. Its damaged data packet hissed across the command deck like the final gasp of a dying enemy. Thalvor's mandibles clicked in irritation as the visuals bloomed to life, a modest yellow star, a single blue-green world orbiting it in quiet, almost arrogant defiance. The planet looked primitive. Fractured. Its inhabitants, called humans in their own crude, barbaric tongue, still fought among themselves with chemical rockets and crude fission devices. Their cities burned nightly with petty tribal wars while the planet's rich resources lay completely undefended, ripe for the taking. Pathetic, Thalvor growled, the translation emitter in his throat turning the word into a low, vibrating threat that made the bridge officers flinch. A death-world species too busy killing each other to ever look up at the stars. Their weapons would bounce off our shields like harmless rain on reinforced glass. Yet something in the scout drone's final transmission sent an uneasy ripple through the crew. Old probe signatures, ghosts from long-dead empires, had approached this system over the centuries and simply vanished. No distress calls. No wreckage. No final screams. Just absolute silence. The humans even had a name for one of their secretive desert bases in their paranoid broadcasts, Area 51. The Dominion officers exchanged uneasy glances. Surely nothing more than primitive superstition. The Zorthaxian Dominion did not believe in ghosts. In the Emperor's vast war chamber, deep within the heart of the Dominion's capital world, the council hissed and clacked with anticipation. One senior advisor dared to speak a single word of caution. The ancient records speak of persistence. These humans are persistence hunters by nature. They chase prey across vast distances until it collapses from exhaustion. Their short history is written in oceans of blood, world wars that slaughtered tens of millions in mere years, yet they rose from the ashes stronger, more cunning, and more vicious each time. Supreme Overlord Crixer slammed a massive clawed fist onto the obsidian table, cracking it with raw power. They are divided. Weak. Disorganized. We will offer them the supreme gift of Zorthaxian order and unity. Any resistance will be educational. His compound eyes locked onto High Admiral Thalvor with predatory intensity. Take the entire 7th Fleet. Break their spirit. Burn their cities if you must. Bring me their world as my newest trophy. Thalvor bowed low, his armored plate scraping the floor, but a faint thread of unease coiled deep in his thorax like a living parasite. He pushed the feeling down. Doubt had no place in the Dominion. The Void Reaver and its massive armada, 200 warships, each one a floating city of death, slipped into hyperspace with a collective scream of tortured reality. Hours later, the fleet emerged at the very edge of the Sol system. Silent asteroids drifted past like ancient witnesses. The red planet Mars glowed coldly and empty. And there, in the distance, Earth turned slowly on its axis, beautiful, blue, fragile, and completely unaware of the storm bearing down upon it. Thalvor opened a secure channel to the entire fleet, his voice dripping with confidence. All ships, full spectrum scans. Prepare the formal ultimatum. These primitives will learn to kneel before the might of the Zorthaxian Dominion. Or they will burn in the fires of our judgment. The first waves of scan data flooded the bridge. Human radio chatter filled the airwaves, news of endless wars, meaningless sports, celebrities screaming about nothing. Their primitive satellites spun lazily in orbit. No orbital fortresses. No planetary defense grids. No energy shields. Thalvor allowed himself the ghost of a triumphant smile beneath his mandibles. But deep in the Void Reaver's ancient data core, an old scout log blinked once more in warning. A single untranslated line from an empire that had vanished long ago: "Do not wake the ape." Thalvor deleted the file with a flick of a claw. The fleet accelerated toward the blue planet, weapons charging and shields raised. Earth waited in silence. And somewhere on its surface, in quiet bunkers and hidden command centers, the first alarms began to sound. The ultimatum tore across every human frequency like the voice of an angry god, if that god possessed clicking mandibles and an insatiable hunger for conquest. People of Earth, High Admiral Thalvor intoned from the bridge of the Void Reaver, his towering insectoid image broadcast in perfect, terrifying clarity to every screen, every phone, every radio on the planet. Your insignificant world now belongs to the Zorthaxian Dominion. Surrender your weapons, your leaders, your resources, and your very future. Resistance is futile. Compliance will be rewarded with a measure of mercy. Defiance will be met with absolute purification. For 3 frozen heartbeats, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Then the world exploded into chaos. In the United Nations General Assembly, delegates from every nation screamed in 20 different languages at once, some collapsing in panic, others pounding fists on tables. In fortified bunkers beneath Cheyenne Mountain and the Ural Mountains, generals slammed glowing red buttons and barked orders that shook the walls. In living rooms from Tokyo's neon streets to the dusty villages of Lagos, families stared in wide-eyed horror as the monstrous alien face filled their televisions and devices. Social media detonated into a digital firestorm, millions of posts, prayers, threats, and desperate memes flooding the collapsing networks. Stock markets worldwide crashed in seconds. And somewhere in a quiet Nebraska cornfield, an old farmer chambered a round into his shotgun, looked up at the sky, and whispered through gritted teeth, "Not today, you bastards. Not on my watch." Thalvor watched the unfolding panic from his command throne with cold satisfaction, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic feeds. His tactical officer reported smoothly, "Their primitive militaries are mobilizing outdated aircraft, submarines, and ground forces. They will be reduced to ash within the hour, Admiral." "Begin the demonstration," Thalvor ordered, his voice like grinding stones. A single plasma lance stabbed downward from orbit. The International Space Station vanished in a blinding white flash, its debris raining across the Pacific like falling stars. The message was clear: resistance would cost everything. Humanity's answer came faster than any Dominion simulation had predicted. From hidden silos across Russia, China, and the United States, ICBMs roared skyward on pillars of fire, old, reliable weapons tipped with warheads the scout drones had never fully catalogued. The Dominion's advanced point defense grid swatted most of them aside like insignificant insects. But one missile got through. It detonated against the shields of the cruiser Dominion's Fury. The explosion was tiny by galactic standards. The shield held firm. Yet the cruiser's captain transmitted something impossible. The humans had already fired a second missile, targeting the exact same impact point before the first strike had even fully registered. Thalvor's mandibles twitched sharply. Primitive savages learning far too quickly. Launch the landing pods immediately. Show these creatures what true power feels like. Thousands of dropships screamed through the atmosphere like a storm of blackened meteors, bristling with plasma repeaters and filled with elite Zorthaxian shock troops, 8 feet of armored muscle, razor claws, and centuries of conquest experience. They targeted the heart of human civilization: New York, Beijing, Moscow, Delhi, London. The first wave slammed into Central Park. Ramps dropped. Armored warriors poured out under a sky already swarming with desperate human fighter jets. The humans opened fire with rifles. It should have been laughable. It wasn't. A New York City police officer emptied his entire Glock magazine into an alien's faceplate at point-blank range, roaring, "Get the hell off my planet." The Zorthaxian staggered backward. Another officer floored his patrol car and rammed it straight into a dropship's landing strut, detonating the fuel cell in a massive fireball that lit up the night. Civilians poured from skyscrapers carrying anything they could find: baseball bats, kitchen knives, Molotov cocktails hastily made from liquor store bottles. A construction worker swung a sledgehammer into an alien knee joint with bone-crushing force. Thalvor watched the body cam feeds in stunned silence as his elite warriors, veterans of 100 planetary invasions, began to fall to improvised weapons and sheer, suicidal human courage. One bleeding civilian, a plasma wound burning through his chest, tackled a Zorthaxian trooper and detonated a homemade suicide vest of fertilizer and diesel. The blast cracked the alien's armored thorax. "Impossible," the admiral whispered, his voice barely audible. "They are dying in droves. And still they keep advancing." Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, a 4-star general stared at the live invasion feeds, his face carved from stone. "They want the whole damn planet? Fine. Activate every contingency package. All of them. Now." Back on the Void Reaver, alarms began to wail across the bridge. Human submarines, silent hunters lurking beneath the waves, had just fired a full spread of ballistic missiles tipped with something the Dominion scanners had never encountered before. Something designed to bypass energy shields. Thalvor's neural implants flared with the first real, icy taste of fear. The humans weren't surrendering. They were just getting started. The sky over Earth burned with unnatural fire. Dropships plummeted through the atmosphere like a black iron rain, while searing orbital lances carved glowing craters where military bases once stood. Entire divisions of human tanks and artillery vanished in blinding flashes of plasma. High Admiral Thalvor paced the command bridge of the Void Reaver, his razor-sharp claws clicking ominously against the metallic deck plating. The air hummed with tension. "Status report," he snarled. His tactical officer's voice trembled through the translator. "Ground forces report. Resistance far exceeding all projections, Admiral. They are turning their own cities into kill zones. Snipers on every rooftop. Children throwing bottles of gasoline from windows. Their outdated jets are deliberately ramming our dropships in suicide runs." Thalvor slammed a massive clawed fist into the console, cracking the reinforced display screen. Sparks flew. "Then glass the cities. Burn their precious metropolises to ash. Teach these vermin the true cost of defiance." But the order never left his mandibles. Because in that instant, humanity unleashed something the Zorthaxian Dominion had never encountered in 1,000 conquests, a global cyber weapon of terrifying sophistication. Their hackers, teenagers in dimly lit basements, gray-haired veterans in secret underground server farms, and entire teams of rogue programmers, had spent decades quietly reverse-engineering fragments of Zorthaxian technology recovered from UFO crash sites. The virus struck the invasion fleet like a silent, invisible plague. Shields flickered and died across dozens of warships. Targeting systems went haywire, locking onto friendly vessels. Communication arrays broadcast nothing but static and screams. The cruiser Dominion's Fury suddenly opened fire on its own escort destroyer. The resulting explosion lit up the night side of Earth like a second, dying sun. Debris spiraled through orbit in a deadly storm. On the ground, in the shattered ruins of what had once been Los Angeles, a lone Zorthaxian platoon found themselves completely surrounded. The humans refused to run. A young woman, no older than 25, with a torn American flag tied around her bleeding arm, stepped forward holding nothing but a kitchen knife. Her voice rang out clear and defiant through the translators. "You want this planet," she shouted, eyes blazing with pure hatred. "Come and take it." The aliens charged. She died with a smile on her face, her blade buried deep in the throat joint of the platoon leader. Around her, office workers, shopkeepers, and students fought like demons, using rebar, broken glass, and their own bodies as weapons. Thalvor stared at the bodycam feed in growing horror. His exoskeleton grew cold. These creatures were not fighting for territory, resources, or survival in any rational sense. They fought because the very idea of kneeling was more terrifying to them than death itself. His intelligence officer burst onto the bridge, data slates trembling in his claws. Captured humans, broken, bleeding, yet still spitting curses, revealed fragments of their history under truth serum. 2 global wars that killed over 100 million. Nuclear fire exchanged in rage. A century of brutal terrorism and counterterrorism that taught them every dirty, underhanded trick imaginable. They perfected asymmetric warfare on their own kind. The officer lowered his voice to a whisper. They call it never again. A phrase burned into their collective soul, live free or die. Thalvor's mandibles clicked rapidly. He spun toward the fleet command. All ships, Titan formation. No more mercy drops. Initiate full orbital bombardment on every major population center. Erase their will to resist. But the humans had been waiting for exactly that. Silent nuclear submarines, lurking undetected in the cold depths of the Atlantic and Pacific, rose just enough to fire. A spread of ballistic missiles streaked upward, tipped with warheads the Dominion scanners had never catalogued, salted with cobalt and laced with something far worse, a tailored biological agent. One warhead detonated high in the atmosphere. The electromagnetic pulse that followed was devastating. It fried electronics across half the invasion fleet. Ships went dark. Life support failed. Panic rippled through Zorthaxian crews for the first time in recorded history. Alarms screamed across the Void Reaver's bridge like the howls of damned souls. Red emergency lights bathed everything in blood. For the first time in his long, merciless life, High Admiral Thalvor felt the cold, paralyzing touch of genuine dread crawling through his carapace. His compound eyes darted across failing displays. The fleet was winning every individual battle. Their technology was superior in every measurable way. But the planet, this insane, death-world planet, was refusing to lose the war. And worse. It seemed to be enjoying the fight. The once proud cities of Earth had become graveyards of twisted steel and roaring fire. Zorthaxian shock troops advanced through the shattered streets of what had once been Paris, their plasma rifles sweeping left and right with mechanical precision. Every shadow hid death. A Mun in a burning tuxedo charged screaming from a ruined cafe, swinging a fire axe with insane fury. A grandmother in a wheelchair detonated a claymore mine hidden beneath her blanket, taking 3 aliens with her in a spray of shrapnel and defiance. Children no older than 12 lured entire patrols into subway tunnels rigged with propane tanks and homemade napalm. The air itself tasted of blood, smoke, and burning hatred. High Admiral Thalvor watched the horror unfold on the bridge of the Void Reaver, his compound eyes wide with disbelief. The casualty reports kept climbing at an impossible rate. His elite warriors, bred for conquest, hardened by 1,000 victories, were dying by the hundreds to civilians armed with nothing but hand tools and pure, unfiltered rage. These are not soldiers, he snarled at his stunned staff officers, mandibles clicking violently. They are nothing but animals. No, Admiral, a surviving ground commander transmitted back, his voice shaking with trauma. They are worse. They are humans. They feel pain. And they have learned to weaponize it like no species we have ever faced. A new feed opened, a hospital in what remained of Berlin. Zorthaxian troops had stormed it expecting mass surrender. Instead, doctors and nurses fought like cornered wolves with scalpels, defibrillators turned into makeshift tasers, and syringes loaded with lethal insulin overdoses. Patients still hooked to 4 drips through themselves onto grenades to shield their comrades and take out alien fire teams. One elderly Mun, riddled with plasma burns, laughed through the agony as he detonated a vest packed with medical oxygen tanks. The Dominion had come to conquer a primitive world. Earth had turned itself into the galaxy's most terrifying meat grinder. In the medical bay of the Void Reaver, a captured American Marine, both legs gone, half his face burned black, laughed weakly through the pain as interrogators worked on him. Blood dripped from his split lips. "You think this is bad?" he rasped, eyes blazing with defiance. "Wait till the rest of us really get going. We invented war. We perfected it. You're just the next bloody chapter in our history books. And we always finish what we start." Thalvor cut the feed in rage, but the human's broken laughter echoed inside his skull like a curse that would not die. Desperation clawed at him. He ordered chemical weapons deployed across the major battlefields, nerve agents designed to melt nervous systems in seconds. The humans responded within minutes by releasing their own nightmare, viruses tailored in secret labs the moment the first dropship had landed. Engineered specifically for Zorthaxian biology using data stolen from crashed probes. Within hours, entire battalions began coughing thick black blood inside their sealed armor. Warriors clawed at their throats, collapsing in convulsions as their exoskeletons failed from within. The Admiral's claws trembled visibly. "Pull all remaining ground forces back to orbit immediately. We will sterilize the entire surface from space. No more landings. No more chances." But the order came far too late. Humanity had already launched everything they possessed. Every last missile. Every plane still capable of flight. Every submarine lurking in the depths. Satellites secretly packed with kinetic rods screamed down from orbit like the wrath of an angry god. One rod struck the Void Reaver's sister ship Eternal Dominion and punched straight through its reactor core in a catastrophic explosion that lit up the moon itself. The bridge of the flagship shook violently. Red emergency lights flashed. Alarms screamed in a dozen overlapping tones. Thalvor gripped the command rail so hard his claws left deep gouges in the metal. For the first time, the old scout log burned in his mind with terrifying clarity. "Do not wake the ape." The ape was not only awake. It was furious beyond reason. It was inventive. It was relentless. And it was turning every horror the Dominion inflicted back upon them 100-fold. Thalvor stared at the growing casualty counter as it passed all acceptable thresholds. The fleet was still technically winning every tactical engagement, yet the strategic reality was collapsing. His once invincible armada was bleeding out in orbit above a planet that simply refused to die. And somewhere far below, in the radioactive ruins, the humans were already preparing their next nightmare. The turning point came not with a deafening bang, but with a cold whisper carried through the darkness of space. Deep beneath the shattered ruins of NORAD, in a bunker lit only by emergency red lights and flickering holographic displays, the last surviving human leaders gathered around a single table. Generals, presidents, and scientists watched the final data feeds with bloodshot eyes. The Zorthaxian fleet was regrouping in high orbit for what looked like a final cleansing burn, a barrage powerful enough to turn the surface of Earth into molten glass. But humanity still had one last card to play. Project Ragnarok. A doomsday network of prepositioned cobalt-salted thermonuclear warheads and a genetically engineered pathogen, designed over decades in secret labs using tissue samples from reverse-engineered alien probes. If the invaders chose to glass the planet, they would carry the infection home with them, a slow, unstoppable galaxy-wide plague that would devour their empire from within. No mercy. No survivors. Only vengeance that would echo across the stars for centuries. On the Void Reaver, High Admiral Thalvor's intelligence teams had finally cracked the deepest layers of human data networks. What they discovered froze every officer on the bridge in pure, paralyzing terror. The holographic archives spilled open like a nightmare. Human history was not a story of peaceful evolution, it was a litany of self-inflicted hell. World wars that slaughtered entire generations. Genocides carried out with industrial efficiency. Holocausts that burned millions while the world watched. Nuclear standoffs where they stared into the abyss of mutual annihilation and still refused to blink. Yet every single time, they rose from the ashes stronger, meaner, and infinitely more inventive. They had turned their own deadliest weapons inward for practice, honing their cruelty and resilience against each other for thousands of years, preparing for the day the stars themselves would come for them. And their biology. Gods below, their biology was an abomination. Adrenaline surges that transformed agony into rocket fuel. An endurance that allowed them to chase wounded prey for days across burning deserts and frozen tundras. Brains wired for lightning-fast pattern recognition and creative destruction. They were persistence hunters who had now decided the entire galaxy was their prey. Thalvor felt his carapace crack under the mounting stress, tiny fractures spreading across his armored chest. "They are not primitive," he whispered, voice hoarse. "They are a weapon. A Deathworld weapon that learned to walk upright and dream of vengeance." On the surface, in the glowing radioactive ruins of 100 cities, the last human holdouts refused to go quietly. They sang as they died. National anthems rose from blood-filled trenches. Battle hymns echoed through collapsing subway tunnels. A single voice, broadcast on every open frequency the aliens could receive, cut through the static like a blade. "We are humanity. We do not kneel. We do not break.
Come and get us. If you dare.
The psychological effect was devastating. Zorthaxian troops still fighting on the ground began to fracture. Battle-hardened warriors who had conquered 1,000 worlds threw down their plasma rifles in horror. Others turned their weapons on their own officers, screaming that the invasion was suicide. The sheer, unrelenting defiance of these soft-skinned mammals was breaking something deep inside the alien psyche. Thalvor, his mandibles trembling, gave the final order. All ships, total orbital bombardment.
Burn everything. Leave nothing alive.
But the humans had anticipated this move months in advance. Hidden railguns, concealed on the dark side of the moon and in camouflaged asteroid bases, suddenly opened fire. Kinetic slugs accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed screamed through the void. The Void Reaver shuddered violently as 3 massive impacts struck home. Shields collapsed in a shower of sparks. Hull breaches vented dozens of crew members into the freezing vacuum. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, but the damage was catastrophic.
Alarms screamed across every deck. The once invincible fleet was dying in real time.
Ships exploded in brilliant silent fireballs.
Escape pods jettisoned like frightened insects.
And then the final transmission reached every surviving Dominion vessel. A calm, almost polite human voice spoke with chilling clarity. You came to take our world. We will make sure you never forget the cost. At that exact moment, infection alarms began wailing on 3 cruisers. The Ragnarok pathogen was already aboard, spreading through ventilation systems and attaching to Zorthaxian biology with perfect, nightmarish efficiency. Thalvor collapsed into his command throne, compound eyes dimming with the weight of impossible realization. The apex predator of Earth had awakened. And it was far worse than any legend had ever warned. High Admiral Thalvor stood alone on the blood-slicked bridge of the Void Reaver, the once mighty flagship now listing helplessly in decaying orbit. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in pulsing crimson. Sparks rained from shattered consoles. The acrid stench of burning circuitry and Zorthaxian blood filled the air. Half his crew lay dead or dying around him, their carapaces cracked open, black ichor pooling across the deck. The blue planet below still burned, scarred and poisoned, yet it refused to die. Earth hung there like a defiant jewel, its atmosphere streaked with fire and radiation, but its heart beating with unbreakable fury. Casualty counters climbed past all sanity. Over half the 7th Fleet, vaporized. Ground forces annihilated to the final warrior. And now the Ragnarok pathogen, that beautiful, terrible human creation, spread like invisible wildfire through the surviving ships. Warriors convulsed in their armor, coughing up liquefied organs, their compound eyes melting as the virus rewrote their biology from the inside out. Thalvor opened a priority channel to Supreme Overlord Crixer, his voice cracking with exhaustion and horror.
Overlord. The invasion has failed. We must withdraw immediately. The humans. They are not a species to be conquered. They are a warning carved into the fabric of the galaxy itself. Crixer's image flickered onto the main holoscreen, mandibles flared in incandescent rage. You dare suggest retreat? Finish the purification. Glass that miserable rock and bring me victory. No. Thalvor roared, committing the ultimate heresy. If we burn their world now, the infection returns with us. Every world we touch will die screaming in agony. They planned for total extinction. They wanted this outcome. Their history is nothing but endless preparation for monsters like us. They turned every atrocity they suffered into fuel for the next war. We cannot win this. On the surface, in the radioactive ruins of what was once New York City, a lone survivor, bloody, half-blind, skin burned black, dragged himself to the top of a shattered skyscraper. With trembling hands, he raised a torn American flag on a bent steel pole. His voice, raw and broken, screamed into the smoke-filled sky, "You came to the wrong neighborhood, you bastards." Around the world, similar scenes played out, survivors singing, cursing, fighting even as their bodies failed. The psychological damage to the Zorthaxian forces was total. Thalvor watched the final feeds and finally understood the ancient scout log that had haunted him since the beginning. Do not wake the ape. The ape was not merely awake. It was enraged beyond measure.
It had looked into the abyss of alien invasion and smiled, because war was its oldest friend. These soft, fragile mammals with no natural armor, no claws, no fangs, had become the apex predator of the galaxy through sheer, unrelenting will.
They adapted. They innovated.
They took every horror inflicted upon them and forged it into deadlier weapons. The Admiral broadcast one final message on every frequency humans could possibly receive. His voice, once dripping with arrogance, now carried the weight of genuine terror.
People of Earth, we leave your world. We will never return.
Let every species across the stars know this truth today: the Zorthaxian Dominion fears the ape. The surviving ships, barely 40 out of 200, limped away from the Sol system, trailing debris, corpses, and the slow death of the Ragnarok plague. Escape pods burned up in Earth's atmosphere as desperate crew tried to flee the infection.
None survived.
Behind them, Earth, broken, glowing with fallout, half its population dead, began to rebuild before the fires had even cooled. Factories that survived churned out new weapons. Scientists worked in irradiated bunkers on cures and countermeasures. Children born in the ashes were already being taught a single lesson: the stars are not friendly. In the years that followed, the legend spread like a virus across the galaxy. Scout drones from 100 empires approached the Sol system, only to turn back at the edge. Every black box recorder carried the same final warning, etched into quantum memory: do not wake the ape. Because when you do, the ape does not kneel. It rises. It learns. It hunts you across the void with nothing but ingenuity and bottomless rage. High Admiral Thalvor never made it home. The plague claimed him in his final hours, alone in his quarters, whispering the same words over and over: we should never have come here. And somewhere on Earth, in a newly fortified command center, a human general looked up at the empty sky and allowed himself a grim smile. "They'll tell stories about us now," he said quietly. "Good. Let the galaxy tremble."
Earth had survived. And the universe would never be the same again. Subscribe.